Hey guys, Master Xeon here, and in this video we're going to be I'll be taking you through the creation process of going from a cube to this model. So this file is available on BlendSwap, and you can download it, examine it, study it, use it, find out the secrets of it. But there's really not a whole lot to it. In fact, if we go to layer 3, we can see my concept mesh that I made to begin with. In case you want to try, changing the shape and retopologizing it yourself. But, nothing fancy to it. But, we're going to go over the process of how I modeled it, retopologized it, sculpted it, added these little pieces into the neck, and that's pretty much it. There's also a little bit of composite to it, but really, nothing fancy here. But I certainly do hope you enjoy. I do see that the glare might be a little bit high, but to adjust that, it's just a matter of dividing this by half. And maybe by half again. No, can't be gambling. Let's keep it like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start over from scratch and get this project underway. Alright, so jumping in here and getting started, of course I always start off with the default cube, subdivide it, Shift-Alt-S, transform the sphere, delete half, add a mirror, and then begin getting the original shape that I was going for. For these type of mech helmet torsos, usually I just do a little quick polymodel and get the shape of the head and the upper body, and then just jump right in after applying a level of subdivision and going into dynamic sculpting. So in this video I actually sped up the parts that were repetitious, as well as kept the speed low on the parts like this that maybe is too fast for some of you viewers. So that is a page I'm going to try to take out of Kent Trammell's book. So as you see, the modeling for this is very simple, just getting a quick shape. Geometry doesn't matter, density doesn't matter, topology doesn't matter, because in the end you're going to see me go about this the same way as I did in the Bot Dukes video, and that's where I modeled it, sculpted it, retopologized it, and then hardened and solidified everything. So this should be a quick video, only being 45 minutes. However, this whole process did take me a little more than 2 hours originally. So using proportional editing, just try to get rough shape, working on the silhouette to get a good nice form for my robot. A strong foundation will definitely make it a lot easier for me to carry on and do the modeling. So next thing is to jump into sculpt mode after applying the mirror, after applying a subsurf, then jump into sculpt mode. Control D to turn on dynamic, and then of course I want to start off just using the grab brush and pulling some shapes out, but I forgot that symmetry is not on, so choose symmetrize, go and turn on X mirror, and now the real shaping can begin. So all I'm doing is just pulling things out. The geometry will automatically tessellate and expand according to the amount of detail I needed. So I turned on only mirror, only rendered in the end panel, so that way I don't see the grid or any lines, it's just the model by itself. And now I'm getting to work on it. So at this point I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to go for, but I did know that I wanted a circle in the middle of the face. I guess that is my motif for now, but I almost didn't realize that I was using almost the same workflow as I did on my last robot. So as you can see, hard surface sculpting for me is just a matter of polishing smooth, using the here I created my own dam brush, deleted a point, changed the other point to vector, pulled it in, and now I can pull up nice sharp lines. And so this is real handy whenever it comes to just cutting in the shapes. So I don't even have the intentions of detailing everything too heavily. I'm just, going about it, sculpting it up, polishing between the edges, and just getting a nice smooth transition. Because through the retopology, the simpler you retopologize it, the smoother it looks in between each of the edges. So I'm still working on finding my form here. but I do have some sort of idea of the type of image I'm going for. So just jumping in and doing a little sculpting. No, this is the same workflow. I mean, this is pretty much the model that I'm building for the Mech Mayhem of Blender Artist Magazine, so be sure to be tuned for that issue, because if they do accept my submission, I'll be having my first text tutorial in magazine format. But know that Shift S turns on your lazy stroke, which allows you the red tag line, which is pretty much the same thing as the lazy brush and ZBrush, to be more accurate with your line work. So another thing to also keep in mind is I am using a Wacom tablet for all my sculpting. I don't know if I ever mentioned that, but I mean, if you're trying to use a mouse to do this, you're not going to have a very good time. So just more sculpting, just trying to pull out shapes. I'm not too worried about how the shapes will come out in the sculpt, because I know that once it's broken up into plates, everything will work out just fine. And running the polish. Another thing is, usually I have matcap view on here so I can see the surface continuity of, you know, my work here, but in this event, the default gray of the viewport worked out fine. But I do turn it back on in the end. So the tools that you see me use are fairly simple. I jump between clay strips, polish, the modified draw brush, or what I call the dam brush over here, and that's pretty much it. The pinch, the magnify, the nudge, they all have their places, but I don't even mess with them for these type of models. So I end up having a pretty easy time just jumping between them, building up shape, hardening the shape, just stiffening out these edges, and just working my way down the body. Back to action. So yeah, I had to start me a song real quick. So now, you know, got to put in the power circle of the chest, you know, cover up the clavicle area, or the sternum area, my mistake. And now just, you know, just scratching in some shoulder pads, and then coming back, of course, to harden it up. Now this was intended to be a very quick test, so I wasn't going for a full robot here. In fact, I've already uploaded the blend of this online, so if you're interested in downloading it, it is, of course, available on BlendSwap. But now the speed is back up to 300, so this is, of course, a little bit faster in real time, but I think you guys get the idea here. Just gotta zone out, sculpt a little bit, just zoom out, just see what you're dealing with here. Dynamic tessellation is probably one of my favorite features in Blender. It's helped my creative process immensely, almost more than N-Cons, which is something I thought I'd never say, but N-Cons definitely changed everything whenever they first were introduced. I mean, I didn't know the first thing about them whenever they first added to Blender in the 2.5 days, but I quickly got up to speed on them, and now I see their enhancements to my workflow, the laziness that they allow, and same with dynamic topology. Before this came about, I wouldn't even mess with sculpting. So since came out, I've had to basically play catch up and get used to these tools. And these processes you see me use here are fairly repetitious. It's just the artistic eye would be the only thing that I would probably have that's unique to me than you yourselves. But you know, the techniques of sculpting, retopologizing, you know, the same normal shortcut keys. These are things that you should definitely know by heart. Like I was telling some other Blender users recently that, you know, WW, subdivide, Shift Alt S, turn to sphere, you know, that should be fairly common. So now, this is the part where I decided that the original shape was boring and needed a little bit of improvement. So this is where I just used Grab Brush and began pulling some shapes out to give it a more unique appearance, because I was worried that the back of the head would be very boring while the front of the head would have all the interest, which is something I'm trying to get better at. And for this little side groove, all I did was just cut it in with the clay, polish it up, dam the edges, and polish again. And it works out brilliant. I mean, it doesn't even have to be perfect because this is a concept mesh. This mesh isn't going to look great. You just want point A and point B explained. And you want maybe point C, you want point A and point C to be defined well. And then point C to basically just not be containing spikes or things that would disrupt the geometry flow for whenever I retopo. So I changed the back cap over to the neutral purple, which is one of my favorites. It just has a nice setup. It allows me to see the surface. It doesn't bring up too much noise from non-continuity, and I can just jump in there and just see what I'm dealing with. And so here you see, you know, within about 30 minutes, I was pretty much finished with most of the sculpting here. And now it's just, you know, finalizing some of these shapes to just ensure that the retopology process goes very easy. And more shaping on the head, and a little bit of work on the back of the neck, of course, to add more visual interest to this. And as you can see with dynamic topology, I'm able to just zoom in and just begin polishing these details. And the more zoomed in I am, the more detail it adds in that area. So you can work on it in macro from afar and then get in very close and start working on things in micro. I will admit the sculpting tools are definitely a bit hard to get used to at times, but it's definitely worthwhile. So next thing is to decimate the model. Always just decimate about 0.2, reduce some of that geometry so it's a little so it's faster in the viewport. And now I'll save this out as article bot or robot article. So the next step is retopology. Got to get out of render mode. Might as well put it on the top of the plane. Add in a plane. Go in edit mode. And from here, turn on the mirror. and turn on the rightmost project button where it projects it onto the surface. And now all I'm doing is just tracing it in geometry. You can trace it as closely and as densely as you want, or you can trace it as loose as you want. And in my case, I always try to trace it where there's enough geometry to show the main form, but not so much that it becomes a nuisance having to deal with so many edge loops. So that's pretty much it. So now we'll jump up to 300%, and you'll see me just rush my way through this particular process. Retopology is another one of those things that I tell artists should definitely be second nature in this program, because it's very easy, it's powerful, and snapping is right there in front of you. So the process of just scratching something together, retopologizing it, and then maybe sculpting it again, it should just be second nature. This part should not be a mystery or hard to do. I mean, I think I talk about snapping in all of my videos now, but definitely one of the best things I ever learned. So the next thing is to begin building the rest of the little pieces. And for the most part, I try to keep it all part of the same mesh, but sometimes I'll press P to separate it, maybe build it, and rejoin it, or I'll just duplicate the geometry, scale it a little bit away, and then continue on retopologizing it. But it's through this process right here of retracing it that you get a nice result. I mean, you could polish the dense mesh until the point that it looks absolutely perfect, but try setting up material indexes on a dynamic mesh. It's not even worth it to even try. So that's why this part's important. Plus, you want to be able to show your wireframe. You don't want to show someone a tri-heavy wireframe. So there's another part where I duplicated the edge loop, moved it off a little bit, and now I'm just tracing up the next part of the form. So at the same time that I'm doing this retopology, I'm also deciding which pieces are together, which pieces are apart, all for the benefit of getting it all to work out while not penetrating itself too heavily. So here's a part where it was probably just better to just merge them all together. And with that, all quads with a circular loop, the edge flow of this is also very important. You can't just fill it in with any old regular geometry. It's important that you have your flow in a way that whenever you harden the edges, that maybe your edge loop will go all the way around the form and allowing you to harden the edges just right, which is usually what I try to go for here. But it isn't the best edge flow, but it definitely gets the job done here. So bringing more edges down, extruding out more pieces, auto snapping is still on, and as you can see, I'm able to quickly make short work of this. But not short enough work. Maybe I should have sped this up a little bit more. So I don't want to waste too much of your time, but I figured making a YouTube time lapse would also make it more interesting for me to refer back to this particular technique. However, this wasn't expected to be my next video. I was actually about to do something also on hard surface, but not a robot, just making knickknacks and pedestals. But expect that tutorial coming soon. I mean, probably at the same time as this one. So there are a couple of mistakes that were made in the retopology process. Connecting certain pieces partially and not completely did make it a little bit hard to do solidify, as well as keeping the edges from collapsing on themselves. So you'll see me deal with that at some point in the video. But the main objective right now is to just get the whole thing traced and leave it at that. In fact, when I was originally doing this, I was thinking, you know, maybe I should just retopologize the head, not do the body, call it a day. But that half-hour's job would cut it, so that's why it was definitely necessary for me to do the whole thing. Sculpt it, you top it, you know? Now this area was a little bit trickier. In fact, I don't quite agree with the whole design of it, but it's too late to be talking about that, right? So one way to try to alleviate that shape and ensure that I get it is to add another edge loop in there, which I'll probably come back and do in just a moment. Right here, mistakes were made. When these pieces all got connected, just things began going wrong here. So it's definitely important to keep your pieces separate. They're supposed to be separate, as well as maybe pre-plan a little bit, which I did neither of. I just wanted to jump in, make a hard surface piece, jump back out. But instead, I ended up staying up till like 4 in the morning playing around with this, as well as just being online with my friends. So at first I tried to extrude it all in. That would have been the easy way out if it would have worked, but it did not work. And every time the edges begin to sink and you don't see any of the pieces, that's when you know that it may be a good idea to just add a few more divisions in it just to ensure that they definitely come through. And here I am looking at the final form of the head, or at least so far. So with the process, instead of using the solidify modifier, I actually decided to go with the Control F solidify option, which is more of a operator instead of a modifier. And like I said, when I was about to do this without doing the body, that was when I kicked myself and was like, you know, I should just play with some of these topology tools. They're supposed to make it so easy. You know, like B surfaces, which is one of my favorites. Right there, I knew at the time that I put my pen stroke going the wrong order, so it was automatically going to twist that. But as you can see, just deleting an edge out cleared that right up. So whenever I'm adding the geometry to retopologize something, all I'll do is just import a plane, just Shift A, add a plane, then in edit mode, just select all the edges and choose Alt M to merge at center, or delete them, or however you want to do it. But usually you want to start off with only enough geometry to just get you in there, but you don't want to make it too hard on yourself. Alright, so with the combination of P surfaces, I was able to quickly fill in the form here. One of the things I see whenever people are first starting out learning retopology is they will do the edges in a continuous order and not guide them through the form of the model, which is one of the more important things with topology. I wish I had an example I could bring up and show, but sometimes with these things it's important to draw the topology for per plane or per form, and then fill in the blanks in between. Or you can just do it like I am and just continuously run through it. But in the back of my head, I'm also thinking about tracing form and looking organic and all of those things. So now, in part 2, retopology. So now I got the head, and now I got the body, and it's looking great. Except for this part, I will extrude in, smooth, with W smooth, Shift Alt S, turn to sphere, and extrude it inwards to give some air intakes. So that part of my robot design process is always fairly common as well. And now comes the hardening stage. So hardening for me is just putting what I call credential loops, or loops that strengthen the setup of other loops next to each other. And by having these double loops, I'm able to easily get the shape to look hard surface. That's the hard surface part of all of my models, is this part right here. Bevels to add an interest to the AO, or the added interest to the AO or the specular. I mean, you want these little crevices, breaks in the surface to catch light and shadow, because that'll really help make the model pop. So, in case you don't know, you can solidify an object with a modifier, or you can solidify it with Control F, solidify, and it works out pretty good. I believe that was made by Kern and Dillon, but I could be wrong there. But in whichever case, it's definitely a darn good add-on. And if you haven't played with Control E, Control F, Control V menus, you should definitely become acquainted with them, since some of your most powerful tools are in those menus. And the best part is, in those menus, the things that you're seeing, they also even show you the shortcuts for it. I mean, if you don't know how to do choose sphere, you can press spacebar, type choose sphere, and it will search for it, and then it'll even tell you that the shortcut is Shift Alt S or Control Alt S. I think it was Shift Alt S. I'm hoping I haven't been quoting that wrong this whole video. So as you see, I'll just add an edge loop and then Alt S to scale it on the normals to give myself that bevel really easily. And then the next thing I'll do is I'll take an edge, bevel it, and then take that edge, put a bevel in between, and that'll allow me to put these little subcuts. These subcuts will give it more of a layered hard surface look that, like I said, catches the eye, catches specular, makes it look more complex, instead of it just being, boring old just surfaces. So now is the process of hardening the back part of the helmet. This part, the topology, is almost alright, except that it's not. It's actually horrible, but I make it. Right here, another area hurt, but hardening up might do the job where I can at least get away with it. But just know that that is a mistake, just like With those holes underneath are now sphinctering is also a mistake, but it's just something you have to learn to live with. In fact, it could be because it solidified the wrong direction, and I just didn't care because I liked the way that it gave the raised edge. But I mean, when you're thinking of these surfaces, you also want to think about the way that they break in between each other, because it is very important. In fact, I ended up just deleting it and just re-adding the circle in it to just get the shape. But here we see an area that's hurt by my topology and the way that I went about it. So the easiest way is to reduce the loops and just delete it. And you know what? Just fill in the blanks. Tune out for one moment and then tune back in. Alright, so I wasn't aware that there were some parts of the video that I paused on. I think that was one of the few. But yeah, there were a couple of segments where I had to go deal with dinner and things like that. So I did have to run away for a moment. But for the most part, this is all a continuous time lapse. In fact, now I turn on MatCap View to see what I'm looking at, and I'm quite pleased with the result of this model. In fact, there's also another thing that I noticed in retrospect, and that is that this part is actually doubling. And it's not supposed to double. I was actually supposed to hide a loop, select the inner loops, and delete them all to ensure that there's no more faces than needed. But for the body, might as well just use a solidify, might as well slap those edges on the mirror and delete the faces. That's one of the things when you use solidify with the mirror is that it will put faces in front of the mirror, which will kind of, I don't know what's the right word for that, but it'll just put a nasty crack in your model, especially with the sub D that gets kind of annoying. So in order to prevent that, you want to do as I do and just select it, delete the faces. Don't delete the vertices, you might find yourself losing more geometry than you want. And now just adding in those subcuts. Subcuts is something that I find comes in very handy now, and so I am putting them in all of my models just in the right places just to get that additional detail that saves me the work of having to make a displacement or normal map for this. And there you see me hide an edge loop, delete the interfaces, scale out, Alt S of course, and adding in my subcuts. And now comes the part of skeleton body, getting the head to fit, merging it all together. But before that, go into sculpt mode, take the sculpt tools, and just begin solidifying some of these forms and shapes here. But for the most part, we are almost finished here. And this is almost, an hour, 20 minutes into this. I'm already looking at the model on an almost finished level, and things are looking good. So the next thing was to connect the head with the neck, as well as Alt S, scale some areas out, harden them up with loops. And this is basically how I can get control on all of these objects where I need it. Except the chin was bare. Underneath it, you can see right up inside of the robot, discover it's an empty machine with no man or soul. So that is where this piece comes in to just fill in that blank. Hit set smooth, and it'll show you the truth. So now, going to go through, delete these edges in the middle. And bring them all to me. By bringing that up, meaning by scaling that out on normals, I'm able to add a nice bevel to it as well that will help it with catching the light. So here's a piece that I made on the fly just to fill it in because there were just some things that were lacking on it. But as you can see, the geometry is fairly simple. I mean, The worst thing I have to do is, delete that interior face, delete the backwards face that's on the inside of it after solidifying it. But, after adding a couple of loops, set and smooth, I'm able to just sculpt it right into place. So now comes the part to fill in the center. Bring in a sphere, face it in the front. For the longest, I used to manually turn those edge poles into faces, into quad faces, but now I've realized you can select a 12 span polysphere and just press Alt J, and that'll actually let you set it to be all quads without a whole lot of work. However, I've noticed on some of the larger numbers, the calculation doesn't always create even quads as you would want. So now comes my favorite part, adding the materials. So with materials, I always go with my same paint pack from Blend Swap. I don't use the Blender material pack or anything like that. I just have collections of materials I just bring in, whether it's stone or volumetrics or fire, but I pretty much have shaders built for everything. However, my library personally is a little outdated, so it is something I need to definitely make some improvements on. But the first thing is to flip all the normals because things were looking a little strange in rendered mode. The area in the center is still flipped the wrong direction. And of course, I'll bring in HDRI. With my HDRIs, I've got quite a collection over the internet, so usually I'll just import one in, turn it off in the background, just use it just to add interest to my reflections. After choosing locking camera to view, I'm able to just control it using my regular mouse buttons. And now I have the model ready. So the first thing I do is turn these normals off so it doesn't look like a porcupine. And I just take it through the paces, coloring as I please. I'll select something, Alt click an edge to select an edge, Control plus to grow that selection, and then from there just assign that vertex group that material. And so per material painting like this isn't really the best practice, but for hard surface stuff I find it definitely does the job, and for most models, per face, per vertex coloring just is probably the easiest out of them all to deal with instead of using masks and textures, having to do it all in a node editor to have some unified material, which is what I probably would need to make in order to give this a different look for the as far as looking dirty or contaminated, which is what I wanted my final look to go for. So since the model's mirrored, I'm able to get a pretty good result just selecting random edges, or not even so random, just selected edges, and just add that in there. So now I'll bring in the next set of materials. This material comes from a metal materials pack called Blend Swap that I'll add in the description, but basically these materials are superb. I mean, if you look at the nodes behind it, they are definitely written by people who know nodes far better than me. So why not take that and let them shade my materials? So I mean, as far as materials go, you should definitely be trying to save up these materials because applying it tediously just gets, applying it manually every time does get very annoying and is quite tedious. In fact, if you think that slapping a glossy shader on it will get you that metal look, you're sorely mistaken. You will definitely have to multiply your input, or you'll definitely have to more likely use a layer weight with another glossy with a richer tone to try to color it a little bit more better from the bottom. But I'm not talking about nodes here. We're talking about texturing now. But yeah, maybe that could be a future video, is coming back and just showing some of the great things I've learned about nodes. But back to the video. So now we're rigging it. 3-bone rig. That's all you need for a torso. That's all you need for a robot's torso. So I will just parent it with empty groups. I'll put that in weight paint mode. Select the bone. Since the bone is selected, the weight paint group is already highlighted. And now I'm just manually grouping. So I can go back into edit mode. And select the neck. And try to select the neck again. Assign it to a group. Check my groups. Select what's left, assign it to last group. That's it. This baby is rigged. But his neck reveals there's no human inside. There's no soul, there's no machinery, there's nothing. So here's a little trick I figured out recently, translating over from another program, of course, and that is to add in a circular ring, array it, use a lattice to deform it, so you'll see me apply the array after turning on merge, setting the cursor to the geometry, adding in a lattice, adding some spans, changing it to be outside only, Control P, parent, go to my object, remove that lattice parent so I can delete it freely without it making my geometry jump. And now I can just freely world deform, shape this in there. And the lattice is definitely a powerful tool. This is one of the things I remember trying to learn more about whenever I first started, was modeling with lattices. But really there was not a whole lot of tutorials about it in documentation, so I mean, in the end I just kind of figured out what lattices were supposed to do, and I've been using them ever since. So after using automatic weight painting, now we see that there's like some rubber lining kind of coming up around the neck, so that'll definitely add to the visual interest of the piece. But we're not done yet. I'm even going to go over the compositing for this particular model. Not a whole lot, just a little bit of color correction and a lens flare. And the good thing about these materials is, since their schemes set up off of material faces, I can replace any of these materials that you see in the side with any other materials. So if I wanted to suddenly be overwhelmingly navy, I just slap in a navy. If I want it to be overwhelmingly chrome, I just slap a chrome in there. And each time I do that, I see a different variance, I see a different possibility. And that's really one of the things that makes me enjoy material. Um, that's one of the things that makes me enjoy the material application process, is because, I'm not only picturing just this model, but I'm picturing what kind of variances I would want to use if I had multiple of the same model. Or what if it was an army, or what if I was giving it an evil brother, that kind of stuff. But this is pretty much the finished result. I mean, there's a couple of more areas of interest that I add, but one is that I do put this empty in front of his face, parent it to the bone, and now no matter where the head's going, the front circle is the depth of field target. And that is important because depth of field definitely adds a little bit to the model as far as realism. However, I am beginning to see that maybe I add a little bit too much depth of field. And lowering the lights also adds charm to it. So one of the things you might notice is that the emission lights aren't affecting the model very heavily, and that's because, stupidly, I had set the clamp to be 0.8 when I should have, or 0.6, when I should have left the clamp at around 1.5. Clamping basically eliminates values that are super high so that they prevent fireflies. So usually if you want your model to render faster with less samples, I start off playing with the clamp. The clamp's one of the first things I come to, just because I've become intimately acquainted with it. So whenever it comes to dealing with it, I know exactly what I'm gonna get. And that's it. So this is the model. I mean, after this video ends, I do work on it a little bit more just to do some finishing touches. But like I said, if you do want the model, you can download Blend Swap. My tiles were too small, so I jumped those up to 256. So it'll render a lot faster using larger tiles. And just a couple of test renders, getting my settings right. But overall, I'm very pleased with the shape and the mood that I'm getting here, especially with those stacks of tiles on the side that allow it to have such nice crafty reflections. So I look through all my passes. First thing I want to do is play with my emit, in which I take my glare, set the threshold to 0, pull up my fade to add more length to it, lower my iterations probably to 2, or my streaks to 2, and then I just play with the angle offset and the color modulation, just so I can take this and add it back to the image. And the cool thing is, once you set up these nodes with the same materials, like I can make some other part have glare, and I can make some other part have that same emission material, and just every emission material will automatically have this glare applied to it because it's now part of the emit pass. So, I always come in, do a little bit of color correction, try to always inject it with red if there's a little too much blue. I always like to take my ambient occlusion pass, clamp it up, clamp it pretty good so the shadows are deep in there. And then I'll soften it, duplicate a node, and before adding the glare, I'll multiply a little bit more AO on it just to really take the image the direction that I'm wanting it to go. And so this is, of course, intended to be a demo of sorts, but I want out of robots now to have a robot Royal Rumble, and this one is now another one I can add to the old scrap pile. Just kidding. I do have plans though for all of these. So creating the backglow, all I did was plug the alpha into a blur, then alpha over all of those composited images that contribute to that previous result over it. And then using a color ramp, I'm able to set the color of the glow so that way it is not so dominatingly white like it's been blessed. Have your model glowing too much, it'll definitely look like it's been blessed. And so this is pretty much the final result. And then I go back, look at the concept mesh. And all these little intercuts will add more visual interest to the overall image. Like I said, every time I add these cuts, all I'm thinking of is shadow catcher or speck catcher, or how rich is going to make the AO look, because you put a bunch of cubes in here and build a robot with it, your AO is probably going to look a little boring. And I'm also thinking about my cavity mask and how I want the cavity map to have more richness to it, because these are things I did after the video where I just started playing around with it. But another thing is the modifier order. Because the armature was after the subsurf, it didn't allow me to use the optimal display, so by changing the order, now it looks fairly low poly and it looks very good in the viewport. But I always like the appearance of having my models in wireframe with a level of subdivision that's not showing in the wire, but is present to smooth out the wires and give it a more refined look. So I'm even able to move the head. Now that little spring thing that you see me make for the neck, I also went ahead and made one for the neck at the top where it connects to the head, just to improve on that, and it helped the model immensely. So as far as HDRIs go, this one worked out alright, but I don't like how it looks so washed up. So I change it out, try to go with another one. This one also looks a little washed up. I mean, what is up with that detail, you know? So, you know, an interesting thing about your HDRI images is you are able to go in, put an RGB curve. An RGB curve, you start playing with them levels, you start to get reflections looking the way you want. And that is precisely the reflections the way that I wanted. So with that, I was able to accomplish this in a short period of time. But I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in, and happy blendering. But that's pretty much all that there is to it. So stay tuned.